everybody. Welcome to the Prognard. I'm your host, Jacob Williams. In today's episode, we are going to be doing a strategy video for these guys, the Syndicate, also known as the U.S. Mafia, the Italian Mafia in Cuba, however you want to look at them. I think it's kind of funny that they call them the Syndicate. It reminds me of that Mel Gibson movie, The Payback, where they kind of use euphemisms for the mafia. Or no, what did they call it in that movie? The Outfit? Or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, so I think it's funny that they called it the Syndicate, but it's really the U.S. Italian Mafia. Anyway, so just as a reminder, in case you missed my last video, which was a strategy guide over the government, that this is not an overview, it's not a rules explanation, it's not an unboxing, this is a strategy guide. So we're going to try and cover a few, I'm going to say advanced, even though that's not the right word, advanced topics on this game. And to help guide us through that, we're going to be looking at these strategy talking points. Okay. So with that out there, let's talk about the victory condition for the Syndicate. Well, Syndicate has to have 8 open casinos. So this marker has to get to here. And that's open casinos, not closed. Closed casinos don't count. And they have to have resources at or above 31 for the instant win. Okay, so that's their victory condition. Now let's talk a little bit about their path to victory. How are they going to achieve these goals? Let me start off by saying that Syndicate just does not play like any faction that I can think of in any game, coin or otherwise. And even within the coin, you know, they sort of play similar to the cartels in Andean Abyss, and maybe a little bit like the warlords in A Distant Plain, but they're a pretty unique faction unto themselves. So it's really hard for me to give you guys a definitive strategy for them. As with any of my videos, I mean, it's just my opinion. I'm always subject to being wrong. You may have something better. This is more like a jumping off point. Okay, so with that in mind, what do I think is the path to victory? I think the path to victory is all about laying low and being a friend to other factions at critical times. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you're going to have the advantage in that you're going to have a ton of money throughout this game. Now, granted, you need a ton of money to win, but you typically have more money than you really need. Okay, and why is that good? Well, you want to make deals. Remember that deals are allowed in this game. So if you're playing Syndicate, you cannot be an introverted player. Okay, like you're going to have to talk to the other players. You're going to have to make deals. And the reason why you have to do this, and I'll talk more about this in faction weaknesses, is let's look at your force pool. That's it. All 6 of them. That's all you've got. 6 guerrillas. So you're not going to be affecting much change. You can't even get 1 guerrilla in every single space on the board. That's how few guerrillas you have. So that's going to force you to have to play smarter. You're going to have to look at who's doing you're going to look at who's doing poorly, and you're going to want to offer them a hand up. And the reason why you're going to want to do that is because you're just trying to fly under the radar. What do I mean by that? Well, government and 26 July are going to fight with each other because one's trying to get support while the other one's trying to get opposition. So they kind of make natural enemies. Directorio kind of doesn't have much better to do than to pick on you because they have low resources. They need to take control over provinces, so they're going to have incentives to take over your casino spaces to get the skim. They are going to fight with some of the other factions, especially in the Holy Trinity, which I will get to in the Directorio video. So, like, you just want to keep these factions constantly fighting each other. The last thing you want for them is to dominate the other players and then start looking at you, because that's going to prevent you from flying under the radar. Now, maybe the things that I'm talking about are a little abstract, and they sound abstract even as I'm saying them. But maybe what are some things that I mean? Well, what if you had a situation, and I'm going to set the government resources to 1. Let's say I have something like that, and I forgot to place a guerrilla in Santiago de Cuba. And let's say we have some situation like this, okay? And the government's resources are at 1. This means the government effectively isn't helping you, and they're kind of more of your natural ally. And they really want to do something against 26 July down here in Santiago de Cuba, but they can't because they have 1 resources. Here is where a situation where you kind of want to be a friend, and you want to say, oh, hey, look, I've got tons of resources. You really want to do that sweep and be a thorn in 26 July's side. Hey, how about I give you, I don't know, let's say 4 resources, so something like that. And then why don't you sweep in La Habana and Santiago de Cuba? Now, why is that a good idea? Giving away resources. This isn't a team game. Well, it's letting them do a sweep in Santiago de Cuba. And, more importantly, they do a sweep in La Habana, and they're getting rid of that pesky guerrilla for you. Granted, they are taking control of the space, and that is a problem that may be able to be mitigated with some bribes or some muscle later on. But you've prevented 26 July from being a thorn in your side. Giving government some resources isn't as big of a deal because their stuff costs a lot more. But they've helped you out. They've helped prevent your casino from being closed. They prevented 26 July from kidnapping, which is a big deal. So it's all about kind of being a friend. You almost want to be like Quark from Star Trek. You want to make some deals to ultimately benefit you, but you want to make your opponents feel like you're helping them out. Okay, so that's what I mean by, flying under the radar and being a friend to other factions is you want to craft these deals that seem good for them, but you're getting a little something out of it too. And maybe it's this like external layer that gives the Syndicate a lot of depth in this game. Maybe a lot of unintended flavor from the designers. All right. So I would say, first and foremost, that is your path to victory, is laying low, being a friend to other people, giving them some resources at key times, or giving them some cash markers, which I guess we should talk about. Actually, let's talk about some casinos before we talk about cash markers. One of the mistakes I see a lot of new people make as Syndicate, and there's a lot of reasons for this, and maybe I should even back up further and say the Syndicate is not a good faction to give to new people. One of the complaints I hear from new people is that they just don't feel that they have interesting choices to make as the Syndicate, because they don't play like a traditional dudes on the map kind of faction, or even if people are experienced to coin, like they've got 1 or 2 games underneath them, these guys don't really play too much like any other faction. So it can be discouraging, and sometimes it might be a good idea to give more experienced players the Syndicate. Okay, but beyond that, what do I see a lot of mistakes that new people do? And this goes back to what I was talking about in the government video. They see that their victory condition is to have 8 open casinos. So what do they start thinking? They just start thinking, I need to construct every chance I get. And what's the problem with that? Well, first of all, construct costs 5 resources. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's not too big of a deal. They start with 15, so that can build 3 casinos, and then they're most of the way there. And that's true, but if you spend all of your resources, how are you going to be a friend to another faction? What are you going to have to offer someone else. And not to mention, if you deplete all of your resources, you're not going to have anything to rally with or terror or do any of your special activities like bribe, which is a pretty good special, and that costs 3 resources. So you can't just spend your resources willy-nilly, because part of your path to victory and flying low under the radar is that you need to prepare for the long game. Okay, I typically see Syndicate wins on the 3rd and 4th propaganda card. Okay, and usually when it's on the 4th propaganda card, we're talking about at the victory phase check. Okay, and I'll talk about this more in propaganda rounds, but you don't get a reset phase on the 4th propaganda card, so you really kind of got to wrap this up at the 4th victory card check, if possible. Okay, so when are the appropriate times to build casinos? Maybe before we discuss when is a proper time, let's discuss where is the proper place to build casinos. All right, you start off with these 3 on the board, and I'm a big advocate that your next 3 casinos need to be built in Pinar del Rio, Havana, and then La Habana, in that order. Okay, well, maybe even Havana, then Pinar del Rio, and then La Habana. Actually, let me get that better in frame. Now, why do I say, yeah, I'm going to officially change that here on the spot. You want to build in Havana first, Pinar del Rio, then La Habana. Now, what is the thinking behind that? Well, in Havana, I want to get there first because I want to keep my eye out for this card over here that we'll talk about here in a few minutes, Sinatra, because it's the only card in the game that lets me violate stacking, which, what do I mean by stacking? You can only have 2 casinos in a space, but with Sinatra, I'll be able to get a coveted 3rd casino into Havana. All right. Now, why is that important? Why is it important to double down on these spots? One word, skim. Okay, the skim is what happens in the propaganda rounds where whoever controls the place the casinos are in, they get to steal 2 resources from you, and there's virtually nothing you can do about it. So they get 2 skim regardless, all right? So what you want to do is cluster your casinos, because it's not 2 per casino, it's just 2 period. Whereas if you spread your casinos across the island, that's more opportunities for people to take control of them and skim off of you. So mitigating the skim is all about doubling up on your casinos. And then I like Pinar del Rio second because it starts off with no people there, but you have to watch out for some events that'll let people just drop forces into Pinar del Rio. And I should really look up the event name that does that, because I couldn't remember it in the last video either. But there is some events that'll just let people drop straight into Pinar del Rio, so you got to keep an eye out for that. And then La Habana, because it started with a casino. I think La Habana will let us actually segment into watching out for who has pieces at your casinos. 26 July can kidnap anywhere they have an underground guerrilla, or anywhere they have more guerrillas than police, and they can do it and where you have an open casino. And when they kidnap, they can take one of your coveted cash markers, which I'll talk about in a little bit, or they can just steal a die roll worth of your resources, okay? Which is bad, because the more resources they have, the better off they're going to do, and the less resources you have, the harder it is going to have over 31 resources. So how do you prevent the skim other than I guess you can't really, well, what are some strategies to preventing the skim other than mitigating? How can you prevent the skim? Well, maybe in a situation like La Habana, you can just bribe people away. or maybe let's say there were 2 guerrillas there, so now that would be under 26 July control. You could muscle to bring in some cubes to make sure no one has control. So you kind of have to really get creative with your ops and special activities to arrest control somehow, and that's probably the primary way you're going to prevent the skim. And I'll talk about this under capabilities. And then another main way you're going to prevent it is with Santo Traficante Jr. All right. Other than that, you're not going to be able to do too much with the skim. And maybe something else you can do to mitigate the skim is let the government skim, which you might be thinking, you know, why would I want to let anyone skim? Well, keep in mind that the government's operations get really expensive. So the most actions you're ever going to give the government off of a skim in one place is 1 action, all right? Because the minimum is 2. And in most cases, you're not even going to get them a full action because their actions are going to cost more than they earn off of the skim. Obviously in one space, you know, multiple spaces they could do more, clearly. But when you let either Directorio or 26 July skim, you know, you're basically giving them 2 operations, right? So maybe part of mitigating the skim is to let government do it. All right. So getting back to the casinos, we talked about where we should put them. Now let's talk about when we should put them down. I think you should put them down when you don't have anything else better to do. Okay. Now, what do I mean by you don't have anything else better to do? Well, one of your highest priorities when you first start the game is you want to get one of your guerrillas into each of the ECs on the board. Okay. Now, why do you want to do that? Well, during the propaganda round in the resource phase, you will also get resources equal to the number on the econ centers if you have more guerrilla in there than cops. Typically speaking, the government doesn't care as much with you being in the ECs, at least during the first part of the game. Okay, you're not preventing them from doing anything. They're going to have their hands full trying to secure Las Villas or Oriente, or maybe dealing with some drama somewhere else. So you can usually slip under the radar in the first and second campaigns by being in those ECs. So that's a high priority that you need to do before opening casinos. Getting some of these cash markers is a high priority when you can. Let me explain a little bit about the cash markers. So not to get too rules heavy, cash markers are good for getting you resources or a base in the resource phase of a propaganda round, or they can be used to get a free lim op when you do an operation only. So what does that mean? I think a great example of how a cash marker can be used. Now, this isn't a syndicate using it, but let's say in Havana, the government had a cash marker. What the cash marker can do is, if the government chooses op only and they choose to sweep, they could sweep these 2 guerrillas. All right, and then they can use this cash marker to get a free lim op in which they could assault. Okay, so cash markers are great to get on the board because not only do they give you resources in the propaganda round, but you could use it to build a casino. You can use it to open a casino during a construct action if you happen to have a dude with cash there, and they can just be used to make friends. All right. But you have to be careful when you have cash out, like especially in a situation, I'm just going to construct a situation here. Let's say you have a single guy with cash in Camagüey. That's kind of bad because it's easy to kill him and then government gets to take the cash. Keep in mind that you can transfer cash at any time. So let's say you were going to lose some cash in Havana. Typically speaking, it's better to let the government have it than the Directorio or 26 July. So just as you're dying, transfer the cash to government before you go away. Okay? So cash markers, good for getting resources, bases, good for making friends. They're important to get them on the board. So at least you thought I was on a tangent. Getting into ECs, getting cash on the board, maybe disrupting someone's chance of winning. These are all things that I would do in lieu of building a casino. Okay? Maybe that loosens up a little bit as you get into the second and third campaign. Because you're going to want to kind of beat the clock and get those casinos out. And especially early in the game, if I build a casino, I'm in no hurry to get them open. I just want to get them on the map, because during the reset phase, I'm going to get these open for free. And that's like getting 5 free resources. All right, so there's a little pro tip for you, free of charge. Okay, so I think that might be good on Path to Victory. I'm sure I missed something I wanted to talk about, but I will try to annotate it in the video if I remember. And just as I said that, I just remembered some things I wanted to talk about. Let's talk about how you might prevent someone from winning real quick. Let's say we have a situation like this, okay, where, and maybe to make it more realistic, let's get some more directorial pieces in there. Okay, let's say you have a situation like this, okay? And let's pretend for a minute Directorio are at their win condition, and maybe if 26 July can terror here, they will win the game, okay? Like, how can you prevent people from winning, okay? You have to really be creative with your special activities and your operations, okay? So let's say I have a feeling the propaganda card's coming up and Directorio's getting ready to win. How can I spike them from winning? Well, I do some operation and I use my muscle special activity to bring 2 cops over here. So now they don't have a strict majority, so they lose control. I just help prevent Directorio from winning. Now let's suppose that government or 26 July is getting ready to win and I have an underground guerrilla. Well, I'm just going to terrorize in this space to set it to neutral. All right. So you do have some options on, you know, knocking the king off of the hill. You just have to really be creative and really think outside the box when you're looking at your ops and special activities. And this outside of the box thinking is kind of what makes it harder for new players to play the Syndicate. Okay, so we've talked about Path to Victory. Let's talk about the things you're needing to do in the propaganda round. Well, you're going to get resources equal to 2 times the number of open casinos. So that may be some incentive to open them up during a campaign, but I don't know, generally speaking, if I'm having to construct to open a casino, it's typically not worth it. I'll just take the hit on resources and open them up during the reset phase. You're also going to get the resources for the unsabotaged ECs, that you have more guerrillas than cops, so that's a high priority, especially early in the game. Other than that, you don't have too much else to... Well, we already covered the skim. That's going to happen automatically, and we've already talked about how you can mitigate those. But after the skim and you cash in your cash markers, you don't really have anything to do for the rest of the propaganda round. So wait for the reset phase. All right. So not much to talk about with Syndicate in the propaganda round. Let's talk about faction strengths. I would say the Syndicate's biggest strength is that they have a ton of resources. Okay, so this is used to buy friends on the map, help a weak player get propped up a little bit so they can be more effective in getting people to leave you alone. All right. I would say that they have some interesting operations and special activities. I wouldn't say they're strong. I would just say that they're interesting. Like with their rally, they're the only faction that can rally anywhere on the board. All right. I don't think they can rally into ECs. Yeah, any province or cities. I'm looking at the player aid. So they can rally pretty much anywhere on the board. They're the only faction that can do that. So that's pretty cool. Their profit special activity is interesting to get those cash markers out. Muscle to move troops around. And bribe to make things go away or to make them active. Bribe is a really interesting special activity. All right, what are some other of their strengths? They tend to fly a little under the radar since they're not taking control or affecting support and opposition too much. So I would say those are some of their strengths. Getting to some of their weaknesses, we already talked a little bit about it. You've got 6 dudes. All right, can't do a lot with 6 dudes, and that's, you know, it is what it is. They're harder to play, so it not something you want to give to a new player. So those are kind of their weaknesses. Maybe I should have mentioned in strengths that you can't get rid of their bases. You can only close casinos, so that's a plus. So a very middle of the road faction. Not too many strengths, not too many weaknesses. You know, they're kind of the humans of Cuba Libre. Throw a little D&D joke out there for you. All right, let's talk about capabilities. Remember, in this game, none of the insurgents have momentums. They all have capabilities. Syndicate has 2. They've got Santo Trafficante Jr. and Mafia Offensive. Santo Trafficante Jr. allows any underground syndicate guerrilla to block the skim, which is super important. We already talked a little bit about that, and I think that's definitely the syndicate's best ability. Try to get that at all costs if you can. Mafia Offensive, I'm indifferent about. It allows them to assassinate as if they were DR, regardless of police. I mean, it's one more arrow in the quiver. I haven't really seen it used that effectively, but maybe it can be. I don't know. I just haven't seen enough games where it came into play. So, you know, maybe try and experiment it on it for yourself. But, I mean, all things considered, I think they have better capabilities than Directorio, and, I mean, not as good as the 26th July. So, you know, solidly in the middle, I guess, which is the theme. Now let's talk about critical events. I kind of have 6 of them out here. And I mostly put them out there because they open casinos, which is something that's, you know, good because you're not having to spend 5 precious resources on them. And it looks like most of them you get to be first up on those as the Syndicate player, which is nice. Fat Butcher is really interesting because it allows you to ambush, which is giving them an ability that they don't have, which is interesting. Another interesting card, I'm using that word too much, is Ambassador Smith. You have to really be careful when you use this, okay? Because you're getting resources, but you're shifting that U.S. alliance box up. So, you know, just be careful. Generally, your government faction is, I mean, everyone's your enemy in this game, right? But government is a little less of your enemy. They're like the closest thing you can have to a friend in this game. They're not quite as friendly as, say, like the British and Indians in Liberty or Death, or even the Coalition and Karzai government in A Distant Plain. But they are somewhat less adversarial to you, I guess is the correct terminology. So, you know, if they're doing really badly, don't be afraid to use Ambassador Smith to shift that alliance box up one. If they're doing really well and you really kind of got to stick it to them, maybe you just op only on that event to, you know, keep that box from going up. But I felt it was noteworthy enough to put in critical events. So there we go. I guess that's going to wrap up my strategy guide on the Syndicate faction for Cuba Libre. Not too much else to say. Send me an email or leave me a message on Board Game Geek. Everything is great. So thanks for watching. This is the Prognard. I'm Jacob Williams. Take care.